It's May 8th, 2003. The Sacramento Kings own a 1-0 lead on the Dallas Mavericks in the Western Conference semifinals. The Kings are trailing in this game, but no one has any doubt they will still move on to the next round and eventually the NBA Finals. But in just the blink of an eye, their championship hopes would come crashing down.
Hustle plays for Ray LaFrance. Over to top Weber. Wild. Weber's not going to be able to catch that lob, and Weber's down. Weber is down, and that's not good for Sacramento. The worst of all possible worlds for Sacramento.
Superstar forward Chris Webber would suffer a torn lateral meniscus in his left knee and would miss the remainder of the playoffs. This was a devastating blow. However, the Kings still managed to put up a good fight, but in the end they couldn't make up for not having their leader, and they lost in 7 games. Chris Webber's knee injury in the 2003 playoffs is one of the most overlooked injuries in NBA history. Later on in this video, I will explain why that is, but first, we need to do a deep rewind on this great Sacramento Kings team, from their quick and inspiring rise to their more than forgetful demise. That wasn't supposed to rhyme. In 1998, the Washington Wizards traded troubled superstar Chris Webber to the Sacramento Kings. Webber was the #1 overall pick in 1993, but he was now playing for his third team. It wasn't like Webber was a bust. He did win the Rookie of the Year award, and he averaged at least 20 points a game in 4 of his first 5 seasons. So why was he playing for his third team? Well, it was all the off-the-court drama. It was really holding him back and derailing what could have already been a promising career. And when he first got to Sacramento, it looked like it was going to be more of the same. Webber initially wanted nothing to do with the city of Sacramento. He went on record saying, quote, "It was like the end of the world to me to have to come here." The Kings were a bad team, but it turned out they were exactly what Chris Webber needed to turn around his career. Once Webber embraced the organization, he never looked back, and a transformation occurred seemingly overnight. In his first season, the Kings finished 4 games over the 500 mark, after finishing 28 below the year before. And then just 2 years later, they were a serious title contender in the Western Conference. Sacramento developed a unique style of play that took the words selflessness and teamwork to new heights. They were constantly putting on a show for audiences, and as a result, they earned the nickname the greatest show on court. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The Kings happened to be rising at the same time Kobe and Shaq were dominating the Western Conference. The Kings and Lakers would develop a bit of a rivalry, and they would meet up several times in the postseason. Unfortunately for the Kings, the Lakers kept coming up victorious. The Lakers beat the Kings in the 2000 playoffs, and again in the 2001 playoffs. In 2001, the Lakers actually swept the Kings, despite the Kings and Chris Webber putting together the most impressive season yet. Webber was actually an MVP finalist. The loss in 2001 actually prompted Sacramento to make some major changes. Gone was fan-favorite point guard Jason Williams. In the offseason, he was shipped to the Grizzlies in exchange for fellow point guard Mike Bibby. Bibby turned out to be exactly what the Kings were missing. In the 01-02 season, the Kings put together an even more impressive year. They won 61 games and posted a 39-2 record at home. Their home court, Arco Arena, had become a much feared place for opposing teams. The atmosphere in there was unlike anything else in the entire NBA. The Kings would cruise through the 2002 playoffs and find themselves in the Western Conference Finals. And can you guess who their opponent was? Yep, the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, unlike the previous year, this series with the Lakers would turn out to be one for the ages. When the series got underway, both teams were exchanging victories, and the Kings nearly went up 3-1, but they blew a big lead in Game 4, and Robert Horry broke their hearts in the final seconds.
Rebound O'Neal, coming up short. Horry for the win!
Unfazed, the Kings still went on to take a 3-2 lead heading into an all-important Game 6. Now most of you know the story from here. Let's just say Game 6 wasn't the most fairly officiated game in NBA history. There were a lot of strange calls going against the Kings, as well as no calls on the Lakers. You know, it's just weird seeing the amount of times the Kings' big men were called for fouls, even though they were just helplessly standing behind Shaq. And who could forget the infamous no call where Kobe elbowed Mike Bibby, which resulted in Bibby getting a bloody nose. Despite all of that, the Kings actually played fairly well in Game 6, but they couldn't make up for the number of officiating errors and they lost by 4. For what it's worth, former NBA official Tim Duncan has gone on record saying that Game 6 was indeed fixed. And Chris Webber himself admitted on the Dan Patrick Show that he believes there was something fishy about that game. So with all that laid out, you be the judge on whether or not Game 6 was fixed. By the way, there's a common misconception that the entire series was fixed. That wasn't the original conspiracy theory. If you remember, the original theory was just that the league fixed Game 6 so the series would go to 7 games, resulting in more revenue for the NBA. But somewhere along the line that conspiracy theory got hijacked, and as a result most people believe the entire series was fixed. But anyway, enough about conspiracy theories. Let's move on to Game 7. Game 7 was in Sacramento, so the Kings had a big advantage going in. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to help them. They had an abysmal shooting night from both the free throw line and the field. The moment appeared to be just too big for them as it was clear nerves were a factor. I mean, how else do you explain a sharpshooter like Peja Stojakovic airballing a wide open 3? The Lakers would use their experience to get the better of the Kings in the deciding Game 7. The Lakers won the series and advanced to the NBA Finals where they made easy work of the New Jersey Nets. This was devastating for Kings fans because they knew their Kings would have dismantled the Nets if they had the chance. Redemption was the theme for the 2002-2003 season. That year, Chris Webber was a man on a mission. He wasn't going to rest until the Kings won a championship. The Kings would go on to have another dominant regular season, finishing 59-23. But because of how good the Western Conference was, the Kings were still only the 3rd seed. The Spurs and Mavericks both won more games. When the playoffs came around, the Kings made quick work of the Utah Jazz in 5 games, sending John Stockton into retirement. In the second round, the Kings were matched up with the Mavericks. In Game 1, Sacramento completely took apart Dallas. Chris Webber balled out from start to finish, and you could really see how much winning a championship meant to him. After this victory, it was really starting to look like this was the Kings' year. Bill Walton, who was a national commentator at the time, went on record saying the Kings will absolutely win the championship this year. And you know, he was right. Because with the Lakers looking tired on the 4th year after a three-peat, the door was wide open for the Kings. But then came Game 2, and this is where it gets tragic. After a ridiculously high-scoring first quarter, the Mavericks would pull away in the second quarter and leave the Kings in the dust. The Kings would just spend the rest of the game trying to pick themselves up. Still, nobody had any second thoughts about them winning the series. But here's where the course of the Kings franchise would change forever. With a little over 3 minutes to go in the third quarter, and with the game out of reach, the Kings still had their starters playing. After a rebound off a missed shot from the Mavericks, Mike Bibby brought the ball up court. He stood at the three-point line for a second and then saw that Chris Webber had a chance to catch an alley-oop. Bibby lobbed the ball up to Webber, expecting the big man to throw it down, but Webber didn't catch the oop. The ball went flying over his head and Webber went straight to the ground with a no-contact injury. He laid there for a second, and then a second turned into a minute, and then a minute turned into several minutes, and so on. He was eventually taken to the locker room on a cart for x-rays. Back in Sacramento, I'm sure you could hear a pin drop at the time. This was supposed to be their year. This season was all about conquest, but in the blink of an eye, it was all over. Webber suffered a season-ending knee injury, and without him, the Kings were done. We should still give the Kings credit though. They managed to extend the series to 7 games, meaning they won 2 more games without Webber, but they lost in Game 7 at Dallas. The Mavericks went on to play the Spurs, but would come up short. The Spurs would advance to the NBA Finals where they made easy work of the New Jersey Nets. This once again drove Kings fans crazy because they knew their team would have been able to easily handle the Nets. It was another bitter ending to a season for the Kings. Chris Webber would miss most of the next season due to his knee injury. Knowing he was going to be gone, the Kings added versatile big man Brad Miller in the offseason. Miller fit right in and he had a great year, and so did the Kings for that matter. They played lights-out basketball and were the number 1 seed in the West for quite some time. Peja Stojakovic was having a career year. He really stepped it up in Webber's absence and he was even in the MVP discussion for a while. Chris Webber would finally return in March of 2004. Unfortunately, it wasn't the comeback the Kings were hoping for. Webber had clearly lost a step. He was significantly slower, and to be blunt, he just looked like he was nailed to the ground. He also negatively affected the team's chemistry. The Kings had gotten used to playing at an up-tempo pace, but when Webber returned, he kind of clogged everything up. As Skip Bayless wrote, if the ball went into Weber, time stopped, and the ball did not come back out. You know, that's really an accurate description. The Kings finished the season 12-12 after Weber's return. As a result, they did not end up with the number 1 seed. The Kings would make it to the second round, but they wound up losing to the Timberwolves in 7 games. Game 7 actually came down to a Chris Webber 3-pointer at the buzzer.
Webber for the tie, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to the Western Conference Finals.
Webber would come back healthier the next season, and he actually put up all-star quality numbers. He still wasn't his old explosive self, but he was starting to adjust to this new style of being more of a catch-and-shoot player who would rely on his high basketball IQ. Webber was averaging 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists when the All-Star game came around. But inexplicably, he was left off the All-Star team. How are you going to tell me that Sean Marion deserved a spot over Chris Webber? Anyway, the Kings started to slip a little after the All-Star game, and they were slowly dropping in the Western Conference. They were still a top 5 team, but you could tell something just wasn't right. The front office clearly thought something was wrong because they would soon do the unthinkable. On February 24th, 2005, Chris Webber was traded to the Philadelphia 76ers in exchange for really a bunch of nobodies. I never understood this decision by the Kings. If you ask me, they should have made one more run with Webber because if you remember, Shaq was no longer in the Western Conference after being traded to the Heat. And the Timberwolves, who beat the Kings the year before, were having a down year. The West was kinda wide open. Also, no disrespect to the city of Sacramento, but it's not a place that can easily attract free agents, so when you have a star like Chris Webber who genuinely wants to play there, you should probably hold on to them as long as you can because it won't be easy to find a replacement. You know, I guess the Kings traded Webber because they saw how much better they played the year before when Peja was the leader, but the Kings ended up trading Peja after Webber, so I don't know what their plan was. Webber went on to play about 2 seasons in Philadelphia where he still managed to put up all-star numbers. In 2005-2006 he averaged 20 points and 10 rebounds, but again failed to make the All-Star team. Another disrespectful snub if you ask me. Webber would later play for the Pistons and then briefly with the Warriors before finally calling it a career in 2008. So that's really the story of Chris Webber's time in Sacramento as well as the rest of his NBA career. But now let's talk about the main focus of this video. What if Chris Webber didn't blow out his knee in the 2003 playoffs? What would have happened? Would the Kings have won the NBA championship? Well, there's very good reason to believe the Kings would have indeed won the title that year. Had they beat the Mavericks, the Kings would have taken on the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals. On the surface, that seems like quite a challenge, especially when you consider the Spurs had home court advantage. But here's why I think the Kings would have prevailed. Of the 3 Spurs championship teams of the 2000s, the 2003 team was definitely the weakest. David Robinson was on his last leg, and Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili were extremely young. Parker was only in his 2nd season, and Ginobili was only a rookie. So this was without a doubt the worst Spurs team of the 2000s dynasty. The Kings probably would have beat the Spurs and then advanced to the NBA Finals where they more than likely would have defeated the Nets. This would have given the Kings their first championship since being in Sacramento, and it even could have been the start of their own little dynasty. You know, I always jokingly say Chris Webber's knee is responsible for at least one of Tim Duncan's rings, maybe more. And honestly, that's a true story. I mean, don't get me wrong, Duncan probably would have got his ring somewhere along the line, but I bet he doesn't get 3 from 2003 to 2007 like he did. Going back to the Spurs for a second, this what-if scenario greatly impacts them as well. If Webber doesn't blow out his knee, the Spurs probably don't win the championship that year. So is it possible Greg Popovich would have been put on the hot seat? Remember, he hadn't won a title since 1999 at that point. Maybe the front office would have grown tired and made a change. Or maybe the Spurs would have seen the Kings as a long-term threat, and as a result, forced a trade to try and improve their team, but in turn ended up negatively impacting them in the long run. That would have prevented them from becoming a dynasty in the 2000s. The possibilities are endless, and you just don't know what could have happened. Another big what-if involves the Lakers. If Webber didn't blow out his knee, and the Kings won it all, does that motivate Kobe and Shaq to stay together longer? Remember, this was a very heated rivalry back in the day. Maybe the Kings winning the title would have rallied the Lakers and caused them to come closer together, of course resulting in Kobe and Shaq staying together a little bit longer, or maybe even a lot longer, who knows. Another big what-if involves Chris Webber himself. If Webber didn't blow out his knee, is he in the Hall of Fame already in 2019? I think without a doubt the answer is yes, because think about it. What's really preventing him from being in the Hall of Fame right now? Yeah, there's that Michigan stuff, but in terms of what he did on the court, what is really preventing him from being in the Hall of Fame? Well, in my opinion, there's two things. One, he doesn't have any rings, and two, he only made 5 All-Star games. Well, the not having any rings argument disappears if he didn't blow out his knee, because the Kings probably would have won the title that year. And the argument about his limited number of All-Star games also disappears because his prime would have lasted longer, and he just would have kept racking up All-Star games. That's what he was doing before he got hurt. He made 4 in a row. And while we're on the topic, I want to talk about why Webber only made 5 All-Star teams. Because that's a very low number for a player of his caliber, and it didn't seem right to me when I first saw that. However, after doing some research, here's how I made sense of it. In 1998, Webber was left off the All-Star team because he and Washington Bullets teammate Juwan Howard had just been accused of rape. The negative press was enough to keep him from becoming an All-Star. Later on, we would learn it was a false accusation. In 1999, there was no All-Star game because of the NBA lockout. Chris made the All-Star team from the years 2000 to 2003. In 2004, he was still rehabbing his knee from the injury in the 2003 playoffs, so he couldn't make the All-Star team that year. And in 2005 and 2006, he was legitimately snubbed, like I talked about earlier. So all of that right there explains why Chris Webber only made 5 All-Star teams. It drives me nuts when he's referred to as a 5-time All-Star because that's such a misleading number. When people hear that, they probably think he was a good player who contributed to some teams, but was nothing special. That couldn't be farther from the truth. Webber was a superstar caliber player who was the face of many franchises. He honestly should have made anywhere from 7 to 11 All-Star teams when it was all said and done. By the way, Reggie Miller also only made 5 All-Star games, which is really surprising. I never bothered to find out why he only made 5, but it's pretty puzzling. So because of everything I just talked about, I really believe Chris Webber's knee injury is the most overlooked injury in the history of the NBA. I just never hear it talked about. You know, I've been watching sports a very long time, and I don't think I've heard it discussed on a sports show once. You always hear about Derrick Rose's injury in the 2012 playoffs. My God, that's been discussed to no end. But nothing about Chris Webber's, and that's really a shame. Hopefully this video will change that. Well everyone, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This was my first NBA video in quite some time. I thought I was long overdue for one. I was actually thinking about making a documentary about this Kings team. I was going to title it The Legend of the 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings, similar to my 2007 Browns documentary. But I decided to just go ahead and make a shorter video instead. It saved a lot of time. I do want to take a second to apologize to the loyal fans of my channel, all 5 of you. My channel's been pretty quiet the last few months. I think I've been averaging about 1 video a month, if that. I don't know, I've just been busy with some other stuff. And I'll be honest, my videos haven't been performing very well lately compared to when I first started. So I've kind of lost the motivation to keep pumping out videos. But don't worry, I am not giving up. I plan on doing this for quite some time. And I'm sure I'll have a breakthrough again sometime in the future. Maybe it'll be this video. Probably not, let's be honest. Well, with all that said, I'm going to close out this video. Please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, I'm Ramen Robbie, and thanks for watching.